During my schooling days, whenever I participated in a school run, I used to wonder whether I can beat Usain Bolt while running. Right? To those who don't know, Usain Bolt was the fastest human on earth. And then while running, I was asking myself how fast I can run, or how slow would I go if I'm too tired? Would I be able to stop in a given time? Right. I used to have this kind of questions in my mind. So in this video, I am going to talk about kinematics. But the kinematics that I'm going to focus on is related to graphs. So this is related to physics, and this video is for those who want to understand a little bit better, right? How graph could make your life easier. Right. Why graphs are very important. First of all, to people like me, graphs help us to visualize the whole situation clearly. So by looking at a graph, I can guess, I can see what kind of situation could have occurred. Right. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but it always occurred to me. I used to hate, I don't like to write a lot. I hate writing, right? So many words, right? So I used to wonder, is there any ways that I could say, any ways that could have saved me because I'm so tired of writing? I could just draw it just like that. Yes, it happened to be yes. And there are two types of graphs that I'm going to present today. So first is the distance time graph, and the other one is the speed time graph. So are you ready? So let us look at distance time graph first. Distance time graph in physics, whenever there are graphs given, there are two information that you could obtain from the graph. First one is the area, the other one is the gradient. There are only two information that you could obtain. So you have to know what does this area of distance time graph represents. So area of distance time graph represents actually nothing. Whereas the gradient of the distance time graph represents speed. Let us analyze every possible graph, right, related to distance time graph. Now, when you see a graph like this, start from origin, this is called straight lined graph. Bear in mind, straight line graph will always give you constant gradient, right? Because distance from the distance time graph, you could only find one information. That is the gradient of the graph. And if this happened to be a straight line graph, the gradient of the graph is always constant. So all you need to do, get 2 points, maybe x1, y1, you could take from origin, and the other points, okay, the other coordinates, maybe you can take from the straight line itself to calculate your gradient. So if you don't know how to calculate your gradient, maybe I'll give you a little bit of information here. Gradient can be calculated, actually gradient is calculated from math. Gradient, to calculate gradient, you need to have two information. One is x1, two coordinates, right? The other one is x2, y2. To calculate the gradient, you just take y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. That's all. Now, the second graph is the graph that occur parallel to the x-axis. This graph is called horizontal, not horrible, but horizontal line. Right. Horizontal line. Remember, if this is about distance time graph, there's only one information, which is the gradient of the graph. So just find the gradient because the area represents nothing. Right, gradient. Okay, I'll prove it to you. Horizontal graph will always gives zero gradient. Now let me prove it to you. I'll just put in two numbers here. Maybe this is 10. Okay, this is 0. And then maybe this is 5, for example. So I will get two coordinates here. One is 0, 10. The other one is 5, 10. Remember how to calculate gradient? So you just write down y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now I'm going to do it a little bit slow. This is my x1, this is my y1, this is my x2, this is my y2. So y2, 10 minus 10 divided by x2 is 5, x1 is 0. Could you see 10 minus 10? That gives you 0. So 0 divided by any number, it will give you 0. Therefore, the gradient is 0. When the gradient is 0, since the gradient represents the speed of the object, so we could say that the speed is equal to 0 or the object itself is not moving. Now, graph number 3. I believe you have seen this in maybe terminal velocity graph, but this is distance time graph. So I purposely gave you the horizontal line because I want to explain more. This type of graph is called a curve graph. Right. Whenever you see a curve graph, you bear in mind to find the gradient of the curve, you need to draw tangent. So what is tangent? Tangent is a straight line that is being drawn on the point of the curve. So if you want to find the gradient, the equation of the gradient that I gave you just now, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, that is only valid to straight line. So for a curve, you need a straight line to find the gradient, to use that equation of the gradient. Right, so I will mark my point. It is up to you which point you want to mark. So I'm going to mark my point maybe here, maybe here, maybe here. I mark more points so get more information that I could get. So just draw your tangent. How to draw a tangent? A straight line that passing through the point. So I want you to see this. This is horizontal. And let me highlight this. Could you see that gradient is getting less steep? I mean, the tangent lines are getting less steep. That means less steep means towards the x-axis, right? So I will write it down. Okay, tangents are getting less steep. So remember from the distance time graph, there is only one information that you could find. Gradient of the graph represents speed. Remember that. So when the tangents are getting less deep, it also means that the gradient is decreasing. So when the gradient is decreasing, it also means that the speed of the object is decreasing. Like me, I'm running and running. I cannot keep up with the fast speed forever, right? I will get very tired. When I get very tired, I'll slow down. That is what's happening, right? So when the speed is getting lesser, right, gradient is decreasing, it also means that, okay, I'll write more information. Speed is decreasing. Now I want you to see this part, Okay, just this part here. Could you see that? Tangent is horizontal. Remember, we talked about horizontal line just now. This is my tangent getting horizontal. So to find the gradient, it is the gradient of the tangent. Remember, horizontal line will always give you 0 gradient. That is why, okay, at the first part of the graph here, first part of the graph until this part, I would say that, okay, let me write it down for you. Okay, this part of the graph, the speed of the object, speed is decreasing. But at the second part of the graph, which is only this part, the speed is equal to 0. Or the object stops moving. Why? Because tangent is equal to 0. That also means that the gradient is equal to 0. That is how you're supposed to explain. Now, the next graph number 4. Have you ever seen this before? This is also called a curve graph. Curve graph. And remember, when this is about distance time graph, there's only one information, which is the gradient of the graph that you can find. Gradient of the graph represents speed. Now I'm going to do this because this is a curve graph. That is why I have no choice. To find the gradient of the graph, I need to draw tangent. So before I draw the tangent, I have to mark the points on the graph that I wanted to find the tangent. So I mark more points on the graph so that I could have more information about the gradient of the graph. Now here, here. So I'm going to draw tangent, 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 and tangent, and tangent. So could you see that my tangents are getting steeper? That means more straight or more towards y-axis. When the tangents are more straight, it also means that tangents are steeper. So when the tangents are steeper, it also means that the gradient is increasing. So when the gradient is increasing, it also means that the speed is increasing. So this graph shows that the object is moving faster. So, for example, like the start of the run, right? You have so much of the motivation. I need to win this. I need to beat Usain Bolt. I always tell myself that, but at the end of the time, Usain Bolt beat me. So I just got to run very fast. So that is all about the graph of distance time graph. But if you have any comments or any hesitation, any doubt, do not hesitate to comment below. So the next graph is about speed time graph. So same goes to speed time graph. There are two information that you could obtain from the graph. Speed time graph, to be honest, is more important as compared to distance time graph because speed time graph gives you more information as compared to distance time graph. Now, the area of the speed time graph gives you the total distance traveled by the object. Whereas the gradient of the speed time graph gives you the acceleration of the object. So only these two information. So if you want to mark it, feel free to pause the video. If you want to copy this, feel free to pause the video. Now, graph number 1, right? Again, so it is similar as distance time graph. It's just that the y-axis is different. Now, when you look at the speed on the y-axis, you have to bear in mind, okay, so for the speed time graph, I need to gain two information. One is the gradient of the graph. One is the area under the graph. The gradient of the graph represents acceleration, and the area of the graph represents the total distance traveled. Now, maybe this graph, I should give you some values to make you understand better. Now, this graph start from 0, origin, so I'll just put 0, 0. Maybe this point, I'll just take until this point. Maybe this is 10. I put in easy value so that it's easier for me to do my calculation. Right, now, to find the gradient of the graph, you have to look at what type of graph this is, right? This is a straight line graph. This is called straight lined graph. Bear in mind, straight line graph will always gives you constant gradient. So I would just write down related to gradient, straight line graph, constant gradient. You have to bear that in mind. To find the gradient, you need to have 2 points, remember? So my point here is 5 and 10. And the other one is 0, 0. So I'm going to use y2 minus y1, gradient. Okay, better write it down. This is x1, this is y1. This is x2, this is y2. So gradient is y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Y2 is 10, Y1 is 0. Wow, very easy. X2 is 5, X1 is 0. So 10 divided by 5, that gives me 2, right? If you want to give a unit, right, how do you see the unit? Let me guide you on that. Could you see that the gradient, it is equal to Y2 minus Y1. What is the unit of Y2? Meter per second. What is the unit of X2 and X1? It is second. So meter per second divided by second. So you get meter per second squared. So that represents acceleration. So therefore, okay, conclusion is that from the graph, you could say that object moves with constant acceleration of 2 meter per second squared, or ms to the power of -2. Because a straight line graph will always give you constant gradient. Therefore, the object will move with a constant acceleration. What about the area under the graph? So this is the area. Could you see that the straight line graph, right? The area under the graph is the area of triangle. So you have to bear this in mind. This is super duper important. Most of the students make careless mistake because they just times the y-axis and the x-axis, and that's it. No, that is not the way. So this is a straight line graph. The area of the straight line graph represents the distance. So area is equal to distance, which is equal to half area of triangle. That is half times 5 times 10. Could you see that? This is 5. So the object has already traveled 25 meter. So those are the information that you could obtain from this graph. Now, the next graph. Oh, this is a horizontal graph. Remember, gradient is always equal to acceleration. And since this graph is a horizontal line graph, gradient is equal to 0. So you could say that since the gradient is equal to 0, object moves with a constant speed because the speed is not changing over a period of time. Right, now let me put this speed as 10 again because I want to do some calculation. So let's say this is 5 again, right? I don't know. 5 and 10 are not my favorite number. I just put it, right? So the area under the graph, area represents distance traveled, which is equal to, in this case, this is the area of rectangular. So it is 10 times 5. So you could see that object travel. In conclusion, we said that object travels with a constant speed of 10 meter per second for, okay, 50 meter. So those are the information from this graph. Now, graph number 3. Wow, this is a curve graph, right? So again, I need to write down the gradient first because gradient seems to be easier. So this is a curve graph. Since it is a curve graph, I cannot use my normal way to find my gradient, remember? Right? I have to draw tangent. So could you see that my tangents are getting steeper? Gradient represents acceleration. Tangents are steeper. So when the tangents are steeper, it also means that the gradient is increasing. So when the gradient is increasing, that also means that the acceleration increases. The acceleration of the object increases. But what about the area under the graph? Area represents the distance traveled by the object. Now, in physics, we do understand that some of the students are not taking additional math, so they do not have the idea or they have yet to learn about integration. So to those who at math students who have taken their at math, so you definitely know that to find the area under the curve, you need to do your integration. But the problem with physics is that some of the physics students are not taking at math, so we do not put it integration into our subject. So that is why the function is not being given all the time. So how do we find the area? So I'm going to teach you the easiest method, and which is very, very inaccurate, but no choice. This is the only method that we can use without integration. So normally if they give you a curve and they want you to find the distance traveled, and if this happened to be a speed time graph, they will draw this graph on a graph paper. So it's like something like this. So they would draw with a number of boxes like this. So it comes with a number of boxes like this. And all you need to do is that first, okay, I will highlight this curved line. This is a curved line. To find the area under the curve, all you need to do is just to calculate the number of boxes below the curve. And then after that, you just times the area of one box. So let's say there are 32 boxes below the curve, right? And the area, maybe this is 2, this is 1. So just times the area of one box, 1 times 2. So you will get the answer 64 meter, something like that. Now the other graph is this graph. It is also a curve graph. So when a curve graph is being given, always write gradient is equal to acceleration, because this is a speed time graph. And then to find the gradient, because this is a curve graph, you have no choice but to mark the point first. And then all you need to do is just to draw the tangent. So you could see that my tangents are getting less steep because it is moved towards x-axis. It is becoming x-axis, right? So this part of the gradient, I could say that gradient decreases. Why? Due to tangents are getting less steep. So when the gradient is actually decreasing, so we could say that acceleration decreases. And then at this part here, this region here, you could see that I can form 2 horizontal lines there. My gradients is equal to 0 because tangents is equal to horizontal lines. So that is why I could also say that acceleration is equal to 0. So you could say that object moves with a constant speed after that. So if you want to find the area, it is the same thing. It is the same thing. They would draw this curve on a graph. And all you need to do is just to calculate the number of boxes under that curve and then multiply by the area of one box. Right, that is all about the graph thingy. But if you have any hesitation, any doubts, or you want me to answer some of the passive questions related to kinematics graphical part, you could always reach me out, or you could also comment below. So these are all my channels. This is all you can reach me up, right? So thank you very much for watching. So I will see you in my next video. Bye.